Today, we're going to have our live session on Learn Liberty about unrest in Nigeria. We're hoping to explain it. Today, we have two guests. One of them is the Executive Vice President of Atlas Network, Dr. Tom Palmer. I'm sorry about that. And our Students Programs Director, Olumayowa Okediran. And I'm Nazria Kamas. I'm the researcher for Students for Liberty and Learn Liberty. And thank you very much for joining.
Thank you. It's been a real pleasure to get this invitation.
Thank you very much, Nazri.
Our pleasure. So today we're going to talk about what's happening in Nigeria. In Students for Liberty, we're trying to raise awareness about the unrest in Nigeria. We're going to get into the details of that very soon. But before that, since our audience are gathering up as well, would you like to introduce yourselves? You can start with Tom, I guess.
Well, I've been working with the Liberty Movement on behalf of Liberty for a long time now, longer than most of our viewers probably have been alive. And it's always a pleasure and a joy, and I love meeting up with Friends of Liberty from all over the world, Nigeria, Turkey, Brazil, China, Norway, every place. And I'm working currently on a book. I've done a number of edited books with Students for Liberty, which has been a real joy for me. And Olumayowa contributed a wonderful essay to one of them. And I'm currently working on a book on development with dignity, which is, again, very much aligned with Students for Liberty message. And I'm an advisor, and I'm also very proud to say I'm a donor. I give money every month to support your important work, which is dear to me.
Thank you so much for joining again. Mayowa, please go on.
All right. Yeah, thank you very much, Tom. My name is Mayowa, and I have spent about a decade thereabout promoting the ideas of liberty in Africa and recently around the world. I serve as director of student programs at Students for Liberty. And like Tom said, like Tom as well, I write about the ideas of liberty and work with incredible young people around the world who are, demanding for freedom in their respective countries and are promoting the ideas of liberty in their localities as well.
Thank you very much, Mayowa, as well. So I think we can get to our topic before spending too much time. But let's start with Mayowa because he is the person who has been into this trouble for longer than any of us here. So can you tell us about the importance of June 12th in Nigeria? What does that mean? What's the meaning for the Nigerians? And what happened on the last Democracy Day on June 12th in Nigeria?
Well, thank you very much, Nazli. This is a good way to enter the conversation. June 12 has a lot of significance for many Nigerians. It was on this day in 1993 that presidential elections were held for the first time since 1983, the 1983 military coup. It was believed to be, it's believed to be the most significant events in Nigeria's post-independence political history. Many people still consider it to be the freest, the fairest, and the most peaceful elections ever held in the country. If you know Nigeria's history with respect to political elections, you know that many of these elections turned out really violent. But this, the June 12 elections in 1993 was mostly different. That was not like the same story you hear with many political elections. About 14 million Nigerians voted on that day, which at the time was a lot. And despite tribal differences across the country, despite religious differences, class differences, many Nigerians came out to vote overwhelmingly for a man who's now late, who was called MKO, Moshood Kashimawo Olawale Abiola. At the time, many Nigerians were trying to change the status quo, which at that time we had they had experienced 8 years of brutal military dictatorships. So it was an opportunity to change from a military regime to a democracy. And Moshood Kashimawo or Olawale Abiola at the time was able to rally around many Nigerians despite the differences. He was a wealthy businessman and was able to sort of just get people together to vote in that election to make sure that we transition into a democracy. Unfortunately, on June 24th of 1993, the military dictator at the time, Ibrahim Badamasi Babangida, annulled that election. And from then on was like a cascading effect of violence across the country. So every year, well, since I think 2 years ago, every year now we celebrate Democracy Day, which is basically a celebration of the democracy that we never had, right? People still look back with nostalgia as they remember. This is a more older Nigerians look back with nostalgia about how they came out to vote and how they were hopeful about the changes or the transition to democracy, but that was thwarted by the military junta at the time. So that has led to rallies around June 12 and also led in partly to many Nigerians coming out to protest this June 12, which was last week.
And what makes this year's protest significant? What is the difference? What was behind the protests?
So over the last couple of months, there's been a lot of agitation amongst Nigerians. Last year, it was NSAS, and Nigerians, mostly young Nigerians, hit the streets protesting police brutality and corruption in government. It pretty much started with police brutality, and it became a much larger conversation about corruption and insecurity in the country. Of course, it's known how that ended. It ended terribly with the Nigerian government showing its tyrannical side, sending military personnel after peaceful protesters in Lekki and other parts of the country. These were just young Nigerians, especially clamoring for against rising insecurity, an affront of free speech. I'm talking about June 12, a couple of days ago. An affront on free speech by the president. The federal government recently banned the use of Twitter. And of course, you know that Twitter is how many Nigerians communicate. There are a lot of benefits from, people just talking freely and communicating freely on a platform like Twitter. The government went after that. There's absence of the rule of law across the country. Police brutality is rife. Police harassment is an everyday occurrence. Just this morning, I spent 2 hours in a police station because a policeman wanted a bribe. If your documents are complete, that's not a problem. If your documents are up to date, it's not a problem. Like, so long as they want money, they will do anything to extort money from you. And it's an everyday occurrence. And Nigerians are tired, are just fed up of living like that. So that led to many young Nigerians hitting the streets, demanding for change. They're asking for nothing more than to live with dignity, to live in peace, and not be worried about police harassment at every turn that they make.
And you also had a personal experience with police a couple of days ago. Would you like to tell us a bit about that as well?
Oh yes. So it's become an everyday occurrence. Like I mentioned just this morning, I had an experience with with Nigerian police. About 2 weeks ago, it was the same story, but unfortunately that was a lot more violent. Like I said, whether your documents, your car documents, I mean, your car documents are intact and you have everything in place. For example, a policeman can stop you and say, and that happened to me once, stopped and said, your car, why does the document of your car say it's blue? So this is a dark blue vehicle. And then he keeps arguing and saying, this car is black. And, basically says, well, you can also that it's dark blue. And then it says, you march to the police station. It matches you to the police station to explain yourself. You don't have to have committed any crime for them to target you. And 2 weeks ago, what happened was my documents were complete. The policeman insisted that I had to go to the police station to explain the document of another car, which belonged to me, which was in my name, with me. So I basically had the document of another vehicle in my car, both belonging to me, both in my name, both valid. He asked that I go to the police station to explain how I have that document with me. And then we got to the police station, which was burnt down during the NSAS protest. So didn't seem like this was operational. And right there and then, threatened to shoot me if I didn't part with some money. Fortunately, I was able to record that transaction and take pictures of the police officer in question, and I've reported this to the police complaints desk. However, they say that it's been investigated. Unfortunately, I have not had anything positive so far. But this is a story that many Nigerians are used to. Many young Nigerians, they face this sort of problems or this sort of challenges with the police every day. It's not new. It's not news. You part with some money after a policeman threatens to shoot you, and it's become the norm. But it gets to a point where Nigerians get tired, where they get fed up, and they say, "No, I want to leave. I want to leave. I cannot live like this. I have to live it with dignity." And that's why you see many young people, hitting the streets and saying enough is enough. They want to live a life of dignity in their own country.
I think Maya was touch upon something very important with dignity. Before I ask my question to Tom, I like to remind our audience that we're seeing your questions. I'm reading all of them. We're gonna get the questions at the end of the session so that we don't interrupt their conversation. Thank you very much for asking the questions. Tom, so Mayowa mentioned dignity, and this is one of the topics that you're very, very much interested in, let's say. Can you give us an overview of what it means to you, and can you also give us a bit of an overview of totalitarian tendencies around the world and how they tend to go about it?
I've been reading a great deal and thinking a great deal about this question of dignity and its relationship to liberty and to the rule of law. And I think that it's a fundamental principle of a free society that every human being is treated with the respect by the law. First off, that we are all equal before the law. There's not one group of people with special privileges and another who lack fundamental rights, but all are equal before the law. That is really foundational principle to insist on equality before the law, regardless of gender or how much money is in your pocket or race or religion or anything else. That is foundational. And related to that, the idea of the presumption of liberty, that it is presumed that you may do what you want with what is yours, with your life and with your stuff, your estate, your car, your home, your furniture, whatever. and that the burden of proof on someone who would restrict is on those who would restrict your liberty. And it can be met. If you're using your property in a way that is dangerous to other people, is going to light a fire and burn down the neighborhood, you could be restricted. But you don't have to go and ask permission to do everything. The alternative view, which we're now seeing ascendant in many countries, is you must ask permission for everything, even down to the level of breathing. Everything requires permission. And that it rests on the fundamental idea that there is not equality before the law, that some are above the law. It doesn't apply to them. So we see this in the case of abusive behavior by police. Olumayowa has documented that, experienced it, and written about it. In the Nigerian case, we've seen it in the news, the abusive behavior, the SARS, the Special Anti-Robbery Squads that have brutalized people in Nigeria. It's not a uniquely Nigerian problem. The whole world has watched what happened in the United States, the horrific murder of Mr. George Floyd in Minneapolis that really galvanized a great deal of attention in the US and in other countries, because we want police to be accountable and not to have the view that our lives are theirs to dispense with. We all matter. We are all entitled to respect, to proper treatment, and not to be murdered, certainly, or beaten or abused, or just shaken down, as we just heard a moment ago. Just simple robbery. So what we have now, unfortunately, are not so much, in many countries, peace officers there to keep the peace, but simply criminals with uniforms. And it's important to fight back against that. Now, I'm generally optimistic about the future of liberty, and I'm optimistic because of Students for Liberty and all the wonderful people who are standing up and saying, we insist on our freedom, on our dignity, and that of everyone around us. That said, there are very serious challenges because autocrats, dictators of various sorts are currently emboldened. So in Nigeria, President Buhari banned Twitter, just apparently on his own say-so, because they had taken down an extraordinarily frightening tweet that he issued, which effectively threatened mass murder and genocide. And they said that violates our standards. So he said, okay, you're banned. Of course, former President Trump in the United States praised him, despite his earlier horrifyingly sick remarks about Nigeria and his disrespect for the Nigerian people. He praised Buhari for doing what he could not, because he wanted to do that. And who else? Well, we see in the Kremlin, Putin expanding this power, poisoning people now with impunity, executing, assassinating people. And it takes very brave people to stand up to them, as we have seen in the streets of Russia. The Beijing model now, which is crushing dissent in Hong Kong, as well as in mainland China, attempting to bring about total control of media and thought. And other countries as well. The president of Turkey had banned Twitter for some time and YouTube and so on, because people were saying things there that he didn't like. And so autocrats naturally say, I don't like what you're saying, I'm going to arrest you. And that is, I have to say, a trend. The good news is people are standing up against it. As we can see with Students for Liberty in Belarus, which has a particularly malignant, nasty little dictatorship, staggeringly corrupt, of Lukashenko, who's been in power since the Soviet Union. SFL has been very active supporting Pyotr Markilau, a really brave young person in Belarus, an SFL activist who has been imprisoned, who has been arrested and constantly harassed, but won't give up. And I think all around the world, we should pay attention to these movements and draw courage in whatever country we live in to stand up for what is right.
Personally, your examples really resonate with me. I'm from Turkey, and we've seen quite a bit of those tendencies. And all of them seem to have similar key elements of populism and totalitarianism. So it's not very far away to think about those things. So Mayowa, I have a question. So what do you think is going to be Nigeria's future? Do you think there is a way out? Do you think there's good enough protests against Buhari, or you think the country is tired and going backwards, let's say?
So, thank you very much, Nazli. Buhari's regime is a reflection of his military past. He was successful at rebranding himself and presenting himself as a reformed Democrat, and won on the basis of being a crusader against corruption. But his true colors, are glaring, so for the world to see. He essentially hoodwinked Nigerians, and unfortunately, it took a while for Nigerians to have the clog removed from our eyes. So I emphasize that between now and the end of his tenure, we are going to continue to see a lot of unrest and people agitating for freedom of expression, freedom to just live their lives in peace without government's high-handedness. I do not expect, any drastic change from, right now from the administration. We've seen enough to understand that this is a trend, and this is his style, right? This is who he is. So I expect that, many more Nigerians would continue to demand for change, and not the kind of change that he clamored for when he was campaigning to be elected as president, but the kind of, real change that that brings about through democracy and freedom of expression, freedom of movement. Because we've seen too much to know that this is a style. In 1998, the Department of State Security under General Buhari's command or authority as the president and commander-in-chief of the armed forces, laid siege to the National Assembly in an attempt to change the leadership of the Senate, because they disagreed with the executive. And, he thought that was the ideal way to go about having his way. We saw the same thing when he spoke at the Nigerian Bar Association at the annual conference, and declared that the rule of law must be subject to the supremacy of nation security and national interest. That's the language that the tyrant uses. And he's moved to also push for like the hate speech bill, numerous refusals to obey court orders. All of this show a tendency towards tyranny, right? So it's not likely that things will suddenly change. So therefore, Nigerians must speak out now more than ever, and in the coming elections, sort of have an opportunity to change the status quo.
Thank you. It's often different. For instance, for my own country, my hopes and my expectations don't really match up all the time. I hope yours will. I have a question to both of you. So for all of us, all three of us here, we are within some pro-liberty organizations. For all of us, we are doing something for SFL, for students for liberty all around the world. What is a pro-liberty solution for these type of regimes? What are the examples you see? What are the best practices that we can share with our audience today? Tom, maybe you could start.
Well, let me set a little bit of a historical background that I think might be helpful. And it goes again to this question about dignity. We are not passive objects to be moved around by the dictators. Each and every one of us is an active agent. We have agency, we have responsibility for our lives, and we can take responsibility also for the direction of the laws and of the societies within which we live. And to do that, we need to focus not only on what are the laws that are on the books, the black marks on paper, if you will, in the law books, those are important, but the mores, the customs, and the behavior that give them life and reality. So to give you an example, I was reading recently in Demosthenes, the great Greek orator and political figure from Athens during this very long period of democratic governance in Athens, which was not perfect, had many, many flaws, but nonetheless, there are lessons to be drawn from historically flawed examples. And he gave a speech, the prosecution of Medius. I'd like to quote a little bit from it. He had been publicly attacked during a public celebration. He was a chorus master. He was beaten. And he brought a case against the man who did it. And he spoke to the jury and he said, each one of you, when you leave this jury, will go home not worried someone is going to attack you and beat you. Why is that? Is it because you are very strong and tough? No, you're not worried about whether you meet a bigger person walking home, because you know the laws will support you. And he said, why, in what way do you know that the laws will support you? It's not because of your own personal strength. He said, it's because of the strength of the laws. And then let me quote a very powerful passage that had a big impact on me. He said, what is the strength of the laws? If one of you is wronged and cries aloud, will the laws run up and be at his side to assist him? No, they're only written words, and they're incapable of doing that. But where is the power of the laws? It's in yourselves, if only you support them and make them powerful to help the ones who need them. So the laws are strong through you and you through the laws. It means having all the most beautiful constitutions and the most beautiful laws written down on paper. If there's not the custom of the people to support their fellow citizens when they are wrong, those don't matter. The Soviet Union had a constitution that guaranteed freedom of religion and freedom of speech. It was only ink on paper. It was meaningless. What matters is to promote a culture of liberty. And that's, again, one of the things I like about Students for Liberty, because you actively promote a culture of liberty, a culture of respecting other people, respect for yourself and respect for everybody else. And I think that's an important part. How do we bring that about? Well, one way is through solidarity. Solidarity is a very important libertarian or classical liberal virtue. It's not often attended to. People think of independence and autonomy, but also solidarity. That when people are being attacked in Nigeria, it affects me as well. And I want to be able to support them, whether it's with words or finances, or even just the knowledge that they are not alone. That there are people in China and Belarus and other powerful, brutal, authoritarian regimes, and they are not alone. They know that they have friends and that those friends care about them in Brazil, in Mexico, in Kenya and South Africa and Korea and all over. That matters a lot. And I think we should promote that and encourage people to stand up and say, we're not going to take this anymore. We won't stand for it. Now, the danger is, and you mentioned populism, these autocrats always claim we are the people. It's absurd, it's a laughable claim, but that's what they claim, is to loot and rob their countries and enrich themselves and make themselves and their family members stunningly wealthy through stealing. But they claim we are the people, and those people demonstrating are the enemies of the people. And we need to overcome that. We need to reject that populist mentality of friends and enemies and talk about being equal citizens and not allow them to divide us by ethnicity, by language, by religion, by race, or any of those other things, but to say what we have in common is we demand to be treated, and we demand that our fellow human beings be treated as equal citizens and human beings.
Thank you very much. I think these are all very important. I have a couple of things to add, but first, Mayova, what do you think or could be a pro-liberty solution? That, if you have anything else to add.
I agree with Tom that it's important to emphasize mutual respect for yourself and respect for others. We have a shirt in Students for Liberty that boldly says, "Don't tread on anyone." You know, that shows that it's not just you. You're not saying, you know, don't tread on me alone, but don't tread on anyone, including yourself. And it's a very important value to teach others and to live by, because if you respect yourself and you respect others, you respect their choices and their choices to live their lives the way they want, so long as they are not infringing on yours, on your rights. I think we're going to have a lot more peaceful societies. Unfortunately, it's crazy that we still have to, you know, this simple message of respect for yourself and respect for others and living together in harmony with other people's and accepting other people's beliefs, that we still have to in this century continue to teach people this simple message.
I totally agree. One of the things I'm very careful about is that when we're talking about libertarianism or pro-liberty ideas, we don't talk about civil society all that much. My background is in civil society, and I think it's one of the very important parts of creating peaceful societies that respect themselves, respect each other. And I think Tom also knows definitely more than me about the importance of civil society, the democratic institutions as well. I think we also need to mention those things when we're talking about pro-liberty solutions.
Absolutely. Can I add a quick point there? It's important this term civil society has more meaning than just clubs and associations. It's people who are civil to one another. And that's really essential to the idea. It doesn't mean everyone treats everyone else like a family member, right? Or a member of your tribe, but rather that everyone is entitled to civil treatment. And so it's a society of politeness, a society of respect. That's the foundation of civil society. And it encompasses all the voluntary associations out there which come together, whether they're chess clubs or mosques or temples or churches or religious associations, social groups, neighborhood clubs. There are an infinite array of them, but they're based on voluntary membership, which requires respect for each other. And that is central to the whole classical liberal mentality, is the fundamental basis is respect for one another. So I think civil society really is the key, and we do need to mobilize civil society. We also need to get the incentives right in the legal institutions. We can talk about that in a moment as well. But mobilizing civil society is absolutely essential to that.
I agree. And actually, we have Olumayowa himself as a great success story about how he mobilized civil society in Africa, because he's actually the founder of African Students for Liberty. So maybe, Olumayowa, would you like to give us a bit of the backstory of how it happened? What were the obstacles? What were the moments that you felt like it's happening?
Thank you very much, Nazli. Thankfully, we have Tom on this call, because Tom, was part of my, journey towards being, embracing the ideas of liberty, or Tom and the Atlas Network. In 2010, I believe, Atlas had funded a series of outreach programs across Africa that supported efforts in Africa to promote the ideas of liberty. And I came about a text funded by, like a book funded by Atlas. It was like simple arguments from Bastiat. Frederick Bastiat was a French lawmaker that lived in the 1800s, and his arguments for how society should be ordered, his arguments for the Candlemaker's petition in particular stood out for me. And I began to question the notions that I had about the role of government in society. And I began to think more critically about the use of force and why the government had a monopoly on the use of force. Why should they have a monopoly on force? I started thinking about self-defense. What's the importance of self-defense in a society that respects, that has mutual respect? And all of these questions I started pondering about as an undergrad in university. And shortly after that, with a few friends, we set up a group on campus where we, met on Sundays to discuss texts that we read from different scholars like the Bastiat, then articles by Mrs., Adam Smith, and that led to a bigger movement. The groups started expanding across the continent, and today we are in over 30 countries. That's now morphed into African Students for Liberty, and we are in over 30 countries across the continent. Hundreds of young people who are dedicated to understanding how to live in, be civil with one another, and mutual respect, and the ideas that sort of will help Africans live in harmony without excessive government interference in their lives. And when I travel to many of these countries like Kenya and Tanzania, and I see young people who share the same values, it lightens my heart to say that the conversations that we had in Abeokuta about 10 years ago, and the vision that we had of seeing an Africa where many young people, thought intellectually. I mean, like they engaged the ideas of how the continent can be better from a free market, from a freedom perspective, and seeing many young people espousing those ideas today is amazing.
I also have to say, Peace, Love, Liberty was one of the first books I read about libertarianism by Tom Palmer as well. And that was one of the things that also changed my perspective a lot. So I guess we all have a lot of things to say to Tom, but so the next question has to be towards Tom. So you've been fighting for freedom around the globe, and you always talk about why it's important to fight for each other, for everyone. Can you tell us a bit about that as well?
I think it's something that is first up embedded in the idea of liberalism. So we use the older term, which is sometimes confusing to people in the US because the term has been adopted by what would in Europe be called social democrats. But we'll understand liberalism means what it originally meant, what it means in most of the world. A belief in the rights and dignity of the individual human person, the right of voluntary association, toleration for differences among us, whether they're religious or other, equality before the law, governments that have a limited function that should be effectively executed or administered, protecting rights, adjudicating disputes, and nothing else, or a very limited range of other things. Those principles are intimately connected to the idea of mutual respect and freedom. It's not just freedom for me to do what I want and to tyrannize over another person. That's not a free society. What we want is free societies where everybody can enjoy equal liberty, consistent with the liberty of everyone else. But there's another kind of psychological dimension that I think is important, that fits with it, that's complementary to it. And that is that it's important that we all draw inspiration for the struggles for liberty of other people. And we see ourselves reflected in them, because liberty is everywhere and always at risk. This is something that history should teach us. We'll never reach a day where, we did it. We have free society. We don't have to worry anymore. Why? Because the desire to dominate and hurt other people is in the human heart, right? It's a dark side, if you will, of human nature. It's in the human heart to want to dominate and hurt and oppress other people. And so we always have to push back against this. It will be with us as long as we are human beings on this planet. We will have this problem. I spent time in the Soviet Union and the communist countries in Europe, and it was so important that people there knew they were not alone, that there were people who cared about them. So going to Romania and Albania and the Soviet countries and Poland and other countries, and meeting people quietly in seminars and so on, they knew there were places that there was freedom and that there were people there who cared about them. And this gave them courage. So we should keep that. And we should remember, in societies that have become more accustomed to rule of law and freedom to a higher degree, no place has it perfectly, but to a higher degree, they should realize that their liberty is also always, always at risk. And so people in Canada and Great Britain or whatever societies, Sweden, Norway, that are accustomed to thinking of themselves as being free, should also look to people struggling for freedom and see their reflection in them and say, yes, we're not going to let freedom die out here as well. And we do see the winds of populism, authoritarian populism, ugly and hateful forms of nationalism and other kinds of ethnic division are blowing. And there are people willing to benefit from that. The autocrats, the kleptocrats, the people who live not from producing and exchanging and creating wealth, but from confiscating and stealing the wealth of others, the cronies and the kleptocracy. Those people all actively support this. And we need to stand up for human values. And that's what I see Students for Liberty doing. And that's what I'm seeing Atlas Network members and partners around the world doing. All of us gain strength when we know we are not alone and we recognize the reflection of ourselves and others.
I think that's why it's important. So we were having this meeting before with Tom and Mayowa, and Tom asked, why are you asking for an old white man to speak in this about Nigeria? And I think that's the reason why we need everyone. So it could be Tom, it could be Mayowa, it could be me. We all need everyone to fight for freedom everywhere. And I think it's important to raise awareness, raise people's awareness about what's happening in all of these countries. So we get messages from students for Liberty from India. Anas is saying they're in solidarity with us. We get messages from Turkey as well. And also in our conversation, we talked about Jimmy Lai. I hope I'm not butchering the name. It's also very important to know that everybody, other people are out there fighting for freedom as well. Would you like to give us a bit of that backstory as well?
Tell you something about that. So here I am, the oldest person on the call by far. It is important to me to know that someday, I'm a realist, I won't be. But the ideas that are important to me will continue to be advanced. These ideas of respect, of a presumption of liberty, and of peaceful mutual benefit and cooperation. So you get generations passing the torch from one to the next, and not just from age, but among groups and nationalities and so on. Well, Jimmy Lai is a good example of that. He's a very, very successful and wealthy person in Hong Kong. He could have left. He could have gone away and lived with his money, having a great life in France or Canada or Australia or wherever. I'm sure of that. But he chose to stay in Hong Kong. He left, he escaped from communist China as a young boy, just on his own, and started working in garment factories and became very successful, became a manager, worked his way up, and then was able to raise the capital because he was so clever to build his own factories and then a whole chain of clothing stores and so on, which was later put out of business by the communists on the mainland, but then into Apple Daily newspaper, which unfortunately just today, all the editors were arrested in Hong Kong. Jimmy Lai, who could have gone and lived in comfort someplace else, was out there with the students, this older gentleman, very rich, and he sat down surrounded by high school and college students because he was with them. And he knows, I think, that he will not be free again. He has been arrested. They put him on trial for all kinds of bogus, idiotic, crazy charges of treason and all sorts of terrible things like that, because he wasn't willing to be degraded by the Communist Party. And he wanted to stand up for his own dignity and those of all the other people. And he sends a signal to me and to other people around the world. We are not alone. And to see such a brave person be willing to give up all his wealth, all of his comfort, to sit the rest of his life in a jail cell. And he does it for his liberty, but he's also doing it for ours.
Please go on, Maya. Thank you so much, Tom. This is very meaningful. So I have one more question, but before, I think I'll keep it to be the last question. We're going to take some questions from the audience now, if it's all right with you. Do you want to talk about anything else?
No, right. I'm happy.
So Elizabeth Berg is asking, what are the differences in style of the police brutality there in Nigeria versus the alleged brutality here in the US? I guess it's a question for both of you because each of you have the part of.
I defer to Mayowa on this question.
Please.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Nazli. I think that's an interesting question. Police brutality here in Nigeria is, as far as I know, much more frequent, and does not. I mean, you hardly get the level of attention that you'd get in the United States. It's, it can be subtle at times, and especially as a result of a failed system. So here's an example. This morning when I got stopped and the policeman sort of marched me to the police station, he basically said, the courts have been on strike. So if I book you, basically, force me to write a statement, I could hold you indefinitely, right? So, the fact that the system is broken is also a way that the police would use. He pointed to a vehicle there and said that vehicle has been here for 3 weeks. If you do not cooperate, basically, what happens to your car. So I doubt that that open, brazen demand for bribes at, with threats of you losing your freedom is, common, is common or widespread in the United States. But that's normal. That's normal here, especially for young Nigerians. And that's not to diminish the horrible, very horrible things that police cops, as you may call them in the United States, do. But the tactics and the openness, despite, for example, a couple of years ago, if I had introduced myself to a policeman as as working with a human rights organization, they would be a little, they will take a lot of precautions. They will be a little cautious about how they approach the situation. However, today I introduced myself as, where do you work? I say I work for a human rights organization, and it follow me, right? So now it's with a lot of boldness that they do that. He asked me a number of times to put my phone in my pocket and make sure, and I should be sure that I'm not taking pictures or recording him. The consequences if you are caught taking a video could be very grave. I'm not, there are many videos of police doing similar things in the United States. Hardly will the police sort of, shoot you or threaten to shoot you because you're taking videos. I'm not saying that doesn't happen, but it's not as open, brazen as it is with the Nigerian police.
Can I
I'm not
add
sure if, yes, go ahead.
just a quick note to that? And this is something that I think classical liberals have an advantage over other groups, which is we think about consequences. We think about how human beings react to incentives. And one of the things we want to change are the incentives that people face. If the police face no consequences for breaking the law, they'll do more of it. Make it more costly, more consequences for them, they'll do less of it. This is economics 101. And so looking at the United States, one of the things that libertarians in this country have really spearheaded and is now becoming a popular movement, but it was libertarians who brought it, is eliminating qualified immunity. The police can violate your rights. They can do so with full knowledge that they're violating your rights, and they're held immune. This is outrageous. It's just outrageous. And if the police would bear personal consequence for stealing from you, for assaulting you, and so on, we would see less of it. So we need to bring about more of these changes in the incentives that they face. Related to that, the photography question, the videotaping police. This has actually become an important issue. France, it's currently a topic of popular discussion. And there's a website, photography is not a crime. When people are stopped for photographing the police breaking the law, the police, of course, go and try to confiscate the camera, other people will support that photographer and take pictures of that person being assaulted for making the photograph. And we have really established much more effectively that it is not a crime in the United States to photograph the police or to videotape them. You can't interfere with them or get in their way. If you're standing back and documenting what they're doing, it is not a crime. But that took a lot of hard work by citizens groups and by photographers to stand up for each other. So that's the sort of thing we need to see more of around the world. And I know in Nigeria, this is very much an active issue. People videotaping police abuse and putting it online and showing the world and also other fellow citizens what they have to live with. And it's unbearable.
True, exactly. So we have another question from our audience. They say, did you see any build-up incidents that led to this unfavorable situation in Nigeria? Any lessons for other countries who may go through this phase in the future? I think that's mostly for me.
Yeah, so if I understand the question, Nazli, is it that what built up to this?
Yes, what are the things that were... Please
go ahead. Sorry. I think it's as a result of having lived through many military dictatorships. When you have a military, when you have the military in power, one of the first things that they do is suspend the constitution. They annul the parliament, and it becomes a one-man show, right? So that continues to degrade the system of justice. Accountability ceases to exist, despite the fact that we've then in 1999 transitioned into a democracy. and we live in what we love to call a democracy. That history of living under a dictatorship has its consequences on the system, on the judiciary, on just the way of life generally. People are more willing to accept um, you know some sort of high, like for example, a policeman requesting for bribes, threatening you to receive. You'll be surprised how many people see it as normal, right? They've normalized it, and it's been normalized because they've accepted wars under a military dictatorship. So this pales in comparison to that. So I think that living under a military dictatorship for decades has its negative consequences on how that, and it's pretty much a direct result of why we are here, where we are right now.
Also, if I may speak as a person who also lives under some sort of dictatorship, I guess first it comes to journalists, then comes to academics, and then the free speech, rule of law, very quickly just disappears, and people get used to it very quickly as well. It's just people are willing to keep on with their lives, but we don't realize meanwhile it's happening. Actually, we don't see the big picture very quickly while it's happening. Would you like to say anything about it, Paul?
Well, I think there is a principle here that what can be done to some of us can in principle be done to any of us. And that means that sometimes targeted minorities, they may be religious or sexual or ethnic minorities, they're easy prey to authoritarian regimes. And of course, they can blame them and say they're responsible for all of our problems. National Socialists did this with the Jews very effectively and murderously. And we should all learn from that and be alert that what can be done to the most weak members of our society, even the ones who are often despised by the majority, can be done to any of us. And I think that's another principle. I've been very impressed by Students for Liberty willingness in difficult countries to speak up for religious, ethnic, sexual, and other minorities, and to say they have the right to equality before the law and to equal freedom. So we should also be, without being so only concerned about minorities, we're concerned about the rights of everybody. And minorities are being targeted, whether ethnic or otherwise. We need to stand up for them. We need to say, in effect, whatever is the group that is being targeted, even if I'm not a member of that group, I am with them. We are all, whatever that group is, whether it was Jews or Armenians or homosexuals or Muslims or Christians or whatever it is, we are with them, and they are not alone. Because when they begin to pick off one group after another, eventually, as the famous saying from the German pastor, then it comes down to me, and who will stand for me. So it's a really important principle. We should have learned this from history. And last thing, I do think it's important. We talked about an old white man on the discussion with young people, that it gives me great pleasure and just joy to see young people all around the world, because I know when you are fighting for your liberty, you're also fighting for mine. I'm very acutely aware of that. All of us are in this together. And last point I'll make, that's why I give money every month to Students for Liberty. I'm not a wealthy person by North American standards, but every month out of my bank account goes a donation to Students for Liberty. And every time it gets sucked out of my bank account, I feel good because I know it's going to a good cause, and I know how careful you are with my humble investments in liberty.
Thank you very much. It means a lot for all of us, for everyone who's part of it, Students for Liberty. So we have the last question, which is also kind of the same question I had for both of you. Patricia R. Fernando says that being so far away, how can we help in changing people's heart to make more human way of treating people? And my question was actually that, why are we doing this here? What is the reason we are doing this here today? So who wants to go first?
Yeah,
Go ahead, Mayowa.
So I think that's a very interesting question. I know why I'm doing this, and I believe the reason I'm doing this is why many other young people across, not only Africa but around the world are doing it. It's because I look at my future, and I look at how things are at the moment, and I know that I do not want to live in a future like this. I do not want my kids to grow up in a future like this, in a future where their rights are not respected, in a society where Twitter can get banned at the behest of someone who's offended. I want to live in a society where I have freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, and it's not going to happen magically, right? It's going to take guts. It's going to take people standing up and saying, we do not want to live like animals. And I think that's why many people around the world wake up, and within Students for Liberty, especially wake up every morning and fight for the ideas of liberty in their respective communities.
That was very elegantly put. I endorse that entirely. I'll add one dimension, which is implicit in what Mayowa said, and that is, we're not here to fight and defeat enemies like they're personal enemies that we hate. We want to make friends for liberty. We want to help people to see the possibility of living together with mutual respect. And Students for Liberty and the broader liberal or libertarian movement around the world is about changing enemies into friends, about making friends for freedom, so we can all live together peacefully and flourish, each in her or his own way. And that, I think, is ultimately what will win the day for us.
Thank you very much for both of you. So today has been the most successful live video we have on Learn Liberty. So right now, more than 200 people are watching this, and at the same time, and more than 3,000 people have seen this. So thank you very much for joining us today for this discussion, but also, like both of you had said, fighting for freedom for all. Thank you very much for everyone who's listening to us. If they want to support us in any way, they can go to studentsforliberty.org. They can donate to us like Tom does every month, and he's very happy about it. Or if you're a student or a young person, you can join our programs. We exist in every continent. There's probably someone who's libertarian, who's a big fan of SFL in your campus. Just go and find them and stay liberal, I guess. Stay free.
Thank you very much for this time.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nazri.